When a German Shepherd started barking obsessively at the new house's ventilation ducts, its owners thought the dog was struggling to adapt. But each day, the animal barked more intensely. When they decided to punish the dog, they discovered something they never imagined possible, leaving them in absolute shock. Hey there, animal lovers. If you're like us and can't get enough heartwarming animal stories, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss a thing. Thanks. Now, back to our story. Sarah adjusted the small pink bow in Lily's hair as she watched the moving truck park in front of the old Victorian house. The morning sun cast long shadows across the overgrown lawn, and a gentle breeze rustled the branches of the ancient oak trees that embraced the property. Duke, the family's majestic German Shepherd, sat patiently beside them, his watchful gaze shifting between his 5-year-old human and the mover's activity. "Mommy, the house is huge!" exclaimed Lily, her brown eyes sparkling with youthful excitement. Sarah smiled, but couldn't shake the nagging unease in her chest. It was true. The house was remarkably spacious for the price they'd paid, a detail that still puzzled her, even after all the realtor's seemingly reasonable explanations. Mark, her husband, approached with some papers in hand, and that reassuring smile that always calmed her. "All the paperwork's squared away. We can start bringing stuff in." He bent down to pet Duke, who responded with a restrained tail wag, without fully diverting his attention from Lily. The move went smoothly enough throughout the morning. Lily skipped through the empty rooms, her laughter echoing through the old wooden hallways, while Duke faithfully followed her like a protective shadow. Sarah watched their interaction with fondness. Ever since they'd adopted the German Shepherd 3 years ago, he'd displayed an extraordinary protective instinct towards the girl. It was in the early afternoon, as they began arranging the furniture, that Sarah noticed the first change in Duke's behavior. The dog, who always maintained a calm and disciplined demeanor, stopped abruptly in the middle of the second-floor hallway. His ears perked up, his body tensed, and his eyes fixed on the vent cover near the ceiling. "Duke, come here," Sarah called. But for the first time since they'd adopted him, the dog didn't obey immediately. He remained motionless, a low, guttural growl beginning to form in his throat. Sarah nodded, trying to ignore the shiver that ran down her spine. There was something in Duke's behavior that disturbed her, an intensity in his gaze, a rigidity in his posture that she'd never seen before. Lily's room was the last one down the hall, a cozy room with 2 large windows overlooking the backyard. Sarah began unpacking the boxes with her daughter's belongings, while the girl decided where each toy should go. Duke followed them, but something in his behavior had shifted. The dog remained in the doorway, his attention divided between Lily and the vent cover on the opposite wall. It was when Lily approached the wall to show where she wanted her bookshelf that Duke barked for the first time, a loud, authoritative bark that made them both jump. The dog surged forward, placing himself between Lily and the wall, his body forming a protective barrier. "What's wrong with him, Mommy?" asked Lily, a hint of fear in her childish voice. Mark tried to call him to sleep in his usual spot in the living room, but Duke remained unyielding. For the first time in 3 years, he disobeyed a direct command from his owner. Sarah and Mark exchanged a worried glance before turning off the light and closing the bedroom door, leaving their daughter under Duke's watchful gaze. In the dark hallway, Sarah gripped her husband's arm. Sarah nodded, but couldn't help looking back one last time before heading to their own room. Through Lily's half-open bedroom door, she could see Duke's silhouette, sitting like a statue, his eyes gleaming in the darkness, fixed on the vent cover. The first week in the new house established a disturbing routine. During the day, Duke alternated between moments of apparent normalcy and increasingly frequent episodes of agitation. Sarah watched with growing concern as the dog systematically patrolled each room, always paying special attention to the vent covers. His behavior was more intense on the second floor, particularly in the hallway leading to Lily's room. "He's different," Sarah commented to Mark one Saturday morning as they made coffee. Upstairs, they could hear Lily humming in her room, her childish voice occasionally interrupted by Duke's barks. "It's been a week and he's still acting weird." They hurried upstairs, finding Duke in front of the vent cover in Lily's room. The dog was furiously scratching the wall below the vent, his barks filled with an urgency that made Sarah's stomach clench. Mark examined the vent cover, using his phone's flashlight. "I don't see anything, Princess. It must just be—" He stopped abruptly when a soft, almost imperceptible sound came from inside the vent. A sound like something dragging. That night, as they tried to eat dinner, Duke's barks echoed through the second-floor hallway. The dog refused to leave his post near the vent cover, ignoring even his food bowl. Mark nodded slowly. "I'll call Dr. Evans tomorrow. Maybe she can prescribe something to calm him down." Sarah and Mark exchanged worried glances. Before they could respond, a dull thud came from upstairs, followed by frantic barking from Duke. Mark approached to examine the vent cover. "The house is old, honey. Things are going to need maintenance from time to time." That night, with Lily sleeping between them in the master bed, Sarah and Mark stayed awake, listening to the occasional barks of Duke, who had refused to leave the girl's room even empty. From time to time, amid the silence of the early morning, a faint, sinuous sound echoed through the vents like a distant whisper or something moving very, very slowly. Sunday dawned with a light rain that seemed to amplify the tension in the house. Sarah awoke to the familiar sound of Duke's barking, more insistent than ever. Lily was still sleeping soundly between her and Mark, who was already sitting up in bed, rubbing his face with obvious weariness. Sarah watched her husband get up and leave the room, phone in hand. Through the open door, she could hear Duke's barks echoing through the hallway, interspersed with sounds of scratching on the wall. The dog's behavior was progressively worsening, and she began to fear that the situation was spinning out of control. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, trying to convey a calmness she didn't feel. "He's not mad, honey. He's just worried about something." "Dr. Evans is coming over in an hour," he announced. "She said that from what I described, it could be a case of separation anxiety or post-move stress." Breakfast was a tense meal, punctuated by Duke's incessant barking. The German Shepherd now refused to leave his post in the second-floor hallway, even when Lily came down to eat. His obsessive behavior was beginning to affect the whole family. Lily barely touched her food, Mark checked the clock every few minutes, and Sarah felt her own anxiety rising with each bark. When the doorbell rang, announcing the vet's arrival, it was as if a weight had been temporarily lifted from their shoulders. Dr. Evans, a middle-aged woman with a serene expression and calm movements, greeted the family with familiarity. She had cared for Duke since they had adopted him. The vet went upstairs with the family, listening attentively as Sarah and Mark described the changes in Duke's behavior. When they reached the second-floor hallway, the dog didn't move from his position, continuing to stare at the vent cover with disturbing intensity. The vet observed the animal's behavior for a few minutes, her face taking on an increasingly intrigued expression. When Duke began scratching at the wall again, she approached to examine the vent cover. Dr. Evans nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the partially detached vent cover. "You know, obsessive behaviors like this usually have a specific trigger. Duke has always been an extremely balanced and protective dog. For him to be acting like this..." The vet took a step back, her expression subtly changing. "Mr. Evans, I suggest you call someone to check these vents as soon as possible. And in the meantime..." Another sound echoed through the vents, this time closer, followed by a deep growl from Duke. Lily clung to her mother's leg as Dr. Evans completed her thought with a seriousness that made Sarah's stomach clench. The night after Dr. Evans' visit was the worst yet. Despite the medication, Duke maintained his obsessive vigil, his occasional barks echoing through the house like ghostly warnings. Sarah and Mark had decided to keep Lily in their room again, but no one could sleep properly. "I can't keep teaching like this," Sarah whispered to Mark as they stared at the bedroom ceiling, the night shadows dancing on the walls. "I'm exhausted. I can barely concentrate. And Lily..." You saw how she is. She barely ate at dinner." As if to contradict him, a distinct sound echoed through the vents, different from the normal creaks of an old house. It was a sinuous, almost rhythmic sound, followed immediately by frantic barking from Duke. "There was something moving. I saw the shadow," Lily sobbed, clinging to Sarah as soon as she approached. "He's going to end up hurting his paws if he keeps scratching the wall like that," Sarah observed, noticing the dog's nails already worn down by the repetitive behavior. "Maybe," Mark hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "maybe it's best to find Duke a new home, temporarily, just until we figure out what's going on and solve the problem." "From the thing that moves in the walls," Lily replied, her voice small but firm. "I hear it when it's all quiet, and sometimes I see shadows by the vent, like something is passing by." "Let's wait for what the technician says tomorrow," Mark decided finally. "If we don't find anything wrong with the vents—" Mark approached with the flashlight, but before he could illuminate the inside of the duct, Duke jumped in front of him, preventing his approach. The dog's protective behavior was different. It was no longer just urgent, it was desperate. As they retreated slowly, with Duke standing guard between them and the open duct, a soft but unmistakable sound echoed through the opening. A hissing sound that made Sarah's blood run cold. The morning brought a heavy rain that seemed to reflect the mood in the house. Lily had finally fallen asleep in her parents' room around 5 in the morning, and Sarah called the school, informing them that the girl wouldn't be coming. She herself called out of her teaching job. None of the adults had been able to sleep after the incident with the vent cover. Duke remained on his vigil in the hallway, more agitated than ever. Dr. Evans's medication seemed to have no effect anymore, and his paws showed clear signs of constant scratching on the walls. Sarah was making strong coffee in the kitchen when the doorbell finally rang. The HVAC technician, a middle-aged man named Joe, listened attentively as Mark explained the situation, omitting the more disturbing details so as not to sound paranoid. When they went upstairs, Duke began a new wave of frantic barking. The technician stopped at the top of the stairs, observing the dog's behavior with professional interest. Joe nodded thoughtfully, approaching the duct cautiously. Duke continued to bark, but something in his behavior had changed. Now he alternated between barking at the duct and looking at the technician, as if begging to be understood. Sarah and Mark approached, trying to see what had caught the technician's attention. Inside the duct, there were distinct marks on the metal, scratches and something that looked like— A sudden sound inside the duct interrupted him. Something moving quickly through the metal. Duke immediately jumped forward, placing himself between the duct and the people, his growl more threatening than ever. In the living room, while Lily still slept in her parents' room, Joe explained his suspicion. "The ducts in this house are old and poorly sealed. I've handled several similar calls in the area. The dog's behavior, the marks in the duct, everything indicates that you have an unwanted tenant in the ventilation system." Before Joe could answer, a sharp scream cut through the air. Coming from the room where Lily was sleeping, the sound chilled Sarah's blood, but no more than the sudden and complete silence of Duke, who until then had not stopped barking. When they reached the second-floor hallway, they found Duke standing in front of the master bedroom door, his body tense like a coiled spring. The dog wasn't barking anymore. Now he was emitting a low, continuous growl, his eyes fixed on the crack under the door. Time seemed to freeze in that hallway. Lily's quiet crying and the sound of something dragging continued from the other side of the door, while Duke maintained his attack posture, the growl building in his throat. At that moment, Duke did something unexpected. Instead of continuing to growl, he turned to Sarah and emitted a low whine, almost as if he were asking for permission. His eyes, always so expressive, alternated between the door and the humans. Before he reached 3, a piercing scream from Lily cut through the air, followed by the distinct sound of something heavy moving quickly across the floor. In a fraction of a second, several events occurred simultaneously. What they saw through the open door would forever be etched in their memories. Lily was standing on the bed, pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with fear. On the floor, between the bed and the door, a sinuous, dark shape moved, exactly as Lily had described, like a living shadow. Duke didn't hesitate. With the precision of a natural hunter and the ferocity of a protector, he placed himself between the bed and the threat. His growl was different now, deep, primal, the sound of one predator confronting another. The snake, because that's what was in the room, raised its triangular head, forked tongue testing the air. It was large, larger than any they had ever seen, its scales glistening under the light coming through the window. Lily sobbed silently on the bed, but demonstrating a wisdom beyond her years, remained completely still. Duke maintained his position, his body a living barrier between the girl and the reptile. "That's why he was so obsessed with the vents," Joe said, keeping his voice low. "He knew. He probably smelled it from day one." The seconds dragged on like hours as the scene unfolded. The snake continued its retreat, Duke maintained his guard, and Lily remained paralyzed on the bed. Sarah squeezed Mark's hand so hard that her knuckles were white. Duke reacted with impressive speed, his jaws closing precisely behind the snake's head, neutralizing it before it could use its fangs. With a swift movement of his powerful neck, he threw the reptile against the wall, stunning it. Mark moved like lightning, scooping Lily into his arms as Sarah cleared the way to the door. Joe was already on the phone, his voice urgent as he requested support from the fire department. Duke kept the snake under control, his focus unwavering even in the midst of the chaos. "To the living room now," instructed Joe, following the family as they descended the stairs. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of the contained struggle between Duke and the snake, low growls mixed with the dull thud of a heavy body against the floor. "The fire department is on their way," assured Joe, positioning himself near the stairs. "Your dog knows what he's doing. Is he a trained German shepherd?" Sarah hugged Lily tighter, tears streaming down her face. "All this time, he was protecting our daughter, and we almost—" The sound of paws on the stairs brought instant relief. Duke came down calmly, his posture still alert but more relaxed. There were no signs of injuries on his body, just some dust marks on his fur. The arrival of the fire department crew brought a new wave of activity. After a quick assessment of the situation, 2 animal control specialists went upstairs to deal with the snake, while a third began questioning the family. "Because this shouldn't have happened," Stan replied, his expression serious. "Ventilation ducts need to be properly sealed precisely to avoid this type of situation. In areas like this, close to more wild regions, it's a basic safety requirement." "That's why the price was so low," Mark murmured, the realization finally hitting him. "They must have known about the problems with the ducts." Sarah's blood ran cold. "A nest?" Sarah looked at Mark, then at their house, their dream that had turned into a nightmare. But before she could answer, Joe, who had been examining some documents on his tablet, cleared his throat to get their attention. The family gathered around the kitchen table, along with Joe and the firefighter Stan, while the other members of the crew continued their inspection throughout the house. Duke remained next to Lily, his body relaxed but still vigilant. Joe's tablet showed a series of documents that made Mark's blood boil increasingly. "These are the previous inspections," Joe explained, swiping his finger across the screen. "In the last 5 years, there have been 3 registered occurrences of venomous animal infestation, all related to the faulty ventilation system. Worse," continued Joe, reaching a specific document, "the last family who lived here sued the previous owners for the same problem. The case was settled with an agreement that included a confidentiality clause." Stan, the firefighter, nodded gravely. "It's more common than it should be. Landlords make superficial repairs, get dubious approvals, and resell the properties without solving the structural problems." Sarah pulled her daughter into a tight hug, silent tears streaming down her face. "Yes, honey, he knew, and we almost, as if understanding that they were talking about him, Duke pricked up his ears, his intelligent eyes moving from one face to another. The German Shepherd had transformed in the family's eyes, from a supposed problem to be solved to the hero who had saved their lives. "Weeks," repeated Mark, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Where are we going to stay all that time?" "You have a solid case against the sellers," he said, organizing the documents on his tablet. "I can testify about the conditions of the ducts and provide all these records. What they did was criminal negligence." Stan got up immediately. "Stay here," he instructed the family. "I'll check it out myself." Mark nodded, reaching out to stroke Duke's head. "He protected our family when we didn't even know we needed protection. How can we even begin to thank him?" The urgency in Stan's voice mobilized everyone immediately. Sarah picked up Lily, while Mark quickly gathered important documents and the car keys. Duke remained alert, his eyes alternating between the stairs and his family, as if calculating the best way to protect them. Stan shook his head, guiding everyone towards the front door. "The ventilation system is completely compromised. We found not only snake nests, but also damaged structures that could collapse at any moment. The house is practically a death trap." "Take a look at this," said one of the firefighters who had just come out, showing photos on his digital camera. The images revealed corroded ducts, abandoned nests, and more disturbingly, large areas where the support structure had been compromised. Lily, still in Sarah's arms, pointed to Duke. "Is that why he kept looking at the ceiling in my room? Did he know it could fall?" "The snakes were probably just the tip of the iceberg," continued Stan, consulting his notes. "The preliminary report indicates compromise in practically the entire ventilation system. The structure may be giving way in several places." "Move further back," ordered Stan, signaling for everyone to retreat to the sidewalk. "You have a very solid case," intervened Joe, who had remained with the family. "Real estate fraud is a crime. With these documents and my testimony, we can—" The family had barely taken a few steps when a deafening crash cut through the air. Part of the roof over Lily's room collapsed, taking with it part of the exterior wall. A cloud of dust billowed into the air, and for one terrifying moment, everyone was paralyzed. The German Shepherd remained in a protective position, but something in his behavior had changed. He was no longer tense or alarmed. On the contrary, he seemed almost relieved, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Stan approached the group, his face grave. "We found something in the rubble that you need to see, something that explains how this house went so long without being properly inspected." "These are old records," explained Stan, showing the yellow documents protected by plastic bags. "It seems that the structural problems of this house began more than 20 years ago, and each owner, instead of resolving the situation, chose to cover it up and resell." Sarah leafed through the papers with trembling hands, while Mark read over her shoulder. Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat of the family car, exhausted by the events of the day, with Duke standing guard faithfully beside her. "And here," continued Sarah, her voice rising with indignation, "there's a budget for a complete renovation of the ventilation system, but it was never executed. Like a hot potato," Mark murmured bitterly, "everyone wanting to get rid of it before the problem blew up." "There's something I don't understand," Sarah said, frowning at a particular set of papers. "Why didn't anyone report it? Why did all these families simply accept losing money and move on?" "Villanova Realty," read Mark on one of the documents, his face paling. "The same one that sold us the house." In the car, Lily stirred restlessly in her sleep, and Duke immediately adjusted his position to be closer to her. The German Shepherd had refused to leave the girl's side since they left the house. Stan and Joe exchanged worried glances. It was Joe who responded. "Based on the damage we've seen so far, we're talking about a complete structural renovation. The ventilation system will need to be entirely replaced, part of the roof rebuilt, not to mention the compromised walls." "You're not alone in this," assured Stan, his tone becoming firmer. "What we've discovered here goes far beyond a simple, shoddy renovation. This is an organized criminal scheme." "The worst part," continued Stan, watching the wreckage with concern, is that you probably weren't the only ones. If this real estate company has been operating like this for so long, the meeting room at the police station was crowded that rainy afternoon. Sarah and Mark, still exhausted from the day's events, sat at a long table surrounded by detectives, a district attorney, and representatives from civil defense. Lily was sleeping on a couch in the corner of the room, using Duke as a pillow. The German shepherd maintained his silent vigil, occasionally raising his head to observe the movement of people coming and going. "So you're telling me," began the DA, Mr. Harrison, adjusting his glasses as he examined the documents spread out before him, "that this same real estate company is involved in all these cases?" Sarah squeezed Mark's hand under the table, seeking and offering comfort. The last few hours had been an emotional roller coaster, with each new revelation more disturbing than the last. "Ghosts," replied another detective. "The professional registration numbers are fake or belong to people who have already passed away. It's a well-elaborated scheme." His voice failed, and all eyes turned to the German shepherd, who raised his head upon hearing his name. The family's case had become special precisely because of the presence of the dog, whose behavior had not only alerted them to the danger, but also providentially averted a tragedy. At that moment, an assistant hurried into the room carrying a thick folder. "Mr. Harrison, we found something else. They're records from an offshore account linked to the directors of Villanova. The amounts..." "And there's more," continued the assistant. "We just received a call from the real estate board. After the news started circulating, other families are reaching out to the organization with similar stories." On the couch, Lily stirred in her sleep, and Duke immediately adjusted his position to accommodate her better. The protective gesture of the dog did not go unnoticed by those present. "How are we going to resolve our situation?" Sarah asked, her voice small but firm. "We can't go back to that house, but we don't have anywhere to go either." His speech was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Raised voices were approaching, and Duke immediately went into alert position, positioning himself between the door and Lily. The bailiff placed a USB drive on the meeting table, his hands slightly trembling. The tip came from a former employee of Villanova. He kept copies of all the documents from the last 5 years. "Everything is here." "My God," murmured the DA, adjusting his glasses as he read the projected documents. They had an entire system set up. It wasn't just a few houses. It was a large-scale operation. The spreadsheets showed dozens of properties, all with similar structural problems, all sold following the same pattern of fraud. There were lists of buyers, manipulated values, and the most disturbing, a rating system that indicated which houses were more urgent for resale based on the risk of structural collapse. Sarah felt her legs weaken, even while sitting. If it weren't for Duke... She looked at the German shepherd, who continued vigilant next to Lily. How many other families, without such a dedicated guardian, could have faced tragic consequences? Mark, who had been silent, absorbing all the information, finally spoke. How did they manage to operate for so long without being discovered? "But they didn't count on one factor," intervened Detective Miller, a small smile forming on his tired face. "They didn't count on a German shepherd determined to protect his family." "Yes, he is," agreed the DA, his expression softening as he looked at the girl. Turning to Sarah and Mark, he continued, "And thanks to him, we can finally deliver justice. Not just for you, but for all the affected families." A wave of renewed energy swept through the room. Mr. Harrison began organizing papers quickly. "We'll need your testimony formalized immediately and..." He hesitated, looking at Duke with a surprisingly tender smile. "I think we'll need to include a detailed account of the dog's behavior too." His instinct was the first clue that led to this whole case. Sarah felt tears in her eyes, but this time they weren't of fear or frustration. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a growing sense that despite all the trauma, something good was emerging from this situation. "That was the president of the Homeowners Association from our old neighborhood. They have a proposal for us." I still can't believe it, Sarah said, rereading for the 10th time the letter in her hands. The Homeowners Association from their old neighborhood had not only offered help to find a new home, but also organized a campaign among the neighbors to contribute to the down payment. It's more than fair, replied Sarah's mother, serving fresh lemonade. After your story came to light, it was discovered that Villanova had plans to do the same scheme in at least 5 more houses in the neighborhood. You and Duke prevented many other families from falling into the same trap. Mark, who was on the phone with Mr. Harrison, hung up with a hopeful smile. The investigation is moving forward quickly. They've already identified more than 30 houses sold in the same scheme in recent years. The judge has ordered the seizure of all assets of the real estate company and the directors. All will be compensated, replied Mark. The DA said that, with the assets frozen and the evidence they have, it's virtually impossible for the criminals to escape. The amount of money diverted is astronomical. As if understanding that they were talking about him, the German Shepherd raised his head, his ears alert. Lily took advantage of the distraction to hug him, and he responded with affectionate licks on her face, making the girl laugh. That too, agreed Sarah. But not only that, we learned about the strength of the community, about how people can come together to help when something is wrong, and most importantly, we learned that sometimes what seems to be our biggest problem can actually be our salvation. In the garden, Lily had found an old ball and now played fetch with Duke. The German Shepherd, always attentive, divided his attention between the game and the natural vigilance of the house and family. Sarah laughed, but her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. The house they had lost was just a building, but what they had gained, a deeper appreciation for their furry protector, the support of the community, and valuable lessons about trust and intuition, was much more precious. You need to see today's paper, he said, his voice excited. Your story, well, especially Duke's story, is inspiring changes that no one expected. I still can't believe they named the law after him, Sarah said, stroking Duke's head, who was resting near the couch. The German Shepherd, now a recognized local hero, maintained his protective nature, but in a more relaxed way, without the desperate urgency of those tense days. Lily, sitting on the rug with her drawings spread out, showed her latest creation, a portrait of the family, with Duke prominently featured, wearing a superhero cape. The teacher asked us to draw our favorite hero, she explained proudly. Everyone at school knows Duke's story now. Mark entered the room carrying newly arrived mail. Another thank you letter, he said, showing the envelope. This one's from a family in Colorado. It seems that Duke's story made them investigate a house they were about to buy more thoroughly, and they discovered serious problems in the ventilation system. Their case had become a turning point in real estate oversight in the country. Duke's law not only established stricter standards for inspecting old houses, but also created an awareness program about the importance of valuing the behavior of domestic animals as indicators of potential structural problems. Remember Joe? Asked Sarah, referring to the HVAC technician who had helped them. He told me that he's now included a new item in his inspections, observing whether the pets in the house demonstrate any unusual behavior near the structures. In the backyard, through the glass door, they could see Lily's new swing set, installed under the shade of a leafy tree. It was a peaceful scene, very different from the tension they had experienced months ago. Duke occasionally raised his head to observe the movement on the street, but his gaze was calm, that of a guardian who knew his territory was safe. You know, said Mark, sitting down next to Sarah on the couch, sometimes I think that all that happened for a reason. We not only saved our family, but we helped prevent other people from going through the same danger. Grandma always says that sometimes we need to go through difficult things to learn important lessons, commented Lily, her childish wisdom shining through her simple words. Lily thought for a moment, her fingers playing with Duke's ear, that we should always trust Duke, that sometimes animals know more than humans, and that, she paused dramatically, smiling, that the best superhero in the world has 4 paws and a tail. The next day, there would be a ceremony at City Hall for the official signing of Duke's Law, where the German Shepherd would be honored as the hero he was. But at that moment, lying at the feet of his family, he already had everything a dog could want: a safe home to protect and people to love. "He was always special," replied Sarah, watching the dog doze peacefully. "We just needed to learn to listen to what he was trying to tell us." Outside, the city continued its rhythm, and somewhere other dogs were possibly alerting their families about hidden dangers. But now, thanks to a German Shepherd named Duke, their voices had a better chance of being heard.